Today's episode of the DCAU Review is brought to you by Anchor by Spotify, the easiest way to make a podcast. When Liam and I first started the DCAU Review, we discovered a few different things. First of all, you had to have somewhere between Lex Luthor and Bruce Wayne level financial resources in order to be able to pay for a website to host your podcast. You also then had to have Richie Foley level intellect in order to figure out how to both edit and then get your podcast distributed onto Apple or Spotify. The great thing about Anchor by Spotify is that all of these things are available in one place. Everything you need to make a podcast is available all in one spot. Anchor has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. And when hosting on Anchor, it makes it very easy to then distribute your podcast on listening platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and many more. And the best thing about Anchor is it is totally free. So what are you waiting for? Download the Anchor app today or head over to anchor.fm and get started in creating your own podcast with Anchor by Spotify.
Say, dirtbag. This is Kid Shriner, the voice of the Green Arrow, and you are listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast.
The original Justice League has become a memory.
I am resigning from the Justice League.
What's going to happen to the League now?
We rebuild. From the ashes of that great conflict, a new team has arisen. A much, much bigger team.
Each of you brings something different to the table.
Old friends, new heroes. And as usual, plenty of bad guys jumping up to get beat down.
Calm down, and I'll let you go. How about you kiss my ass?
Watch out, evildoers. There's nowhere to run. Because this year, they're all around you. The League is unlimited. An all-new original series, starring every superhero worth cheering for. And then some. Justice League Unlimited.
Where am I exactly?
Among friends.
There's strength in numbers.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 223 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal, and with me, my good friend, good brother, the man that runs our Twitter page. It's Liam. Liam, we are continuing in our Flash month here for the month of August of 2022. Well, depending on when you're listening to this episode, I suppose it's still Flash month, regardless of what month or year it is. But we are excited to continue with our Flash-themed episodes, and we are moving on from Justice League, as we've covered the last 2 weeks, and we are in an episode of Justice League Unlimited for this week of Flash month.
That is right, Cal. We just keep rolling right along, and this is an episode that actually kicks off the second season of Justice League Unlimited, and yeah, it's a lot of fun, and it also happens to be a Flash-heavy episode. It's actually the first episode of the Justice League Unlimited series to feature the Flash in a speaking role, so it seemed appropriate for our themed month here. And yes, we are looking at the episode The Ties That Bind today.
That is right, Liam. But before we get into our four categories and our breakdown of the entire plot of this week's episode, we will, of course, get the official IMDb synopsis for this week's episode, The Ties That Bind, easy for me to say, originally aired back on the Cartoon Network here in the States on February the 12th, 2005, meaning we just passed the 17-year anniversary of this episode's debut. Liam, this, of course, is brought to you by The Pod Tower. Head over to youtube.com/The Pod Tower and check out every other episode that we have reviewed thus far, our bonus episodes, and much more. Available on YouTube. It's youtube.com/The Pod Tower. Subscribe there, help support our podcast, and not only will you support us, but you'll support some of our friends over at the Watchtower database, as well as Tim Talk, as their content is also available at youtube.com/The Pod Tower.
That's right, and this is the synopsis for The Ties That Bind, which is written by Jim Steranko and J.M. DeMatteis, directed by Dan Reba, with music by the Dynamic Music Partners and animation by DR Movie Co. And that synopsis reads as such. Mr. Miracle and Big Barda solicit Justice League assistance to free Oberon from Apocalypse. Jean refuses, but Flash decides to help out on his own.
Okay, yeah, that last sentence is a little messy, but it's a pretty solid turn, I'd say.
Yeah, it gets the job done. It's not the prettiest, but it got us across the finish line.
There we go. Absolutely. So breaking down our plot for this week, we are dropped straight in the middle with a trio of characters that, if you are at all familiar with Jack Kirby's Fourth World characters, or perhaps DC Comics over the last 20, 30 years, you're probably familiar with Mr. Miracle is the way that he looks, and Big Barda, not Bertha, Big Barda, as well as their assistant Oberon. They are preparing for what is Scott Free, aka Mr. Miracle's latest stunt, and he is, of course, the world's greatest escape artist. So he is upping the ante a little bit, as we see in the opening scenes here, as he's encasing himself in what appears to be sort of like a sarcophagus type device, freezing that, and then after freezing it, having himself, well, he's locked inside of it, by the way, in full costume, frozen, and then having a locomotive airdropped on top of it. So things don't look good right off the bat for one Scott Free, but of course he's Mr. Miracle. After the train is dropped, and a little bit of drama, we see that he has in fact escaped. As he and Big Barda are celebrating, they turn to look for Oberon, and wouldn't you know it, he's gone, and in his stead is one of my favorite characters in DCAU history. We'll talk about that in just a little bit here when we get into voice acting, but it is none other than the dastardly Granny Goodness, who in his stead, who is very excitedly talking about how she has whisked Oberon away and is holding him hostage and is looking in exchange to get some help.
Granny Goodness. I'll kill you, you demented old gargoyle!
Barda, I'm not gonna let your temper cost us Oberon's life.
I knew you wouldn't let her hurt your old granny, Scott.
What do you want?
Life on Apocalypse has become very difficult since great Darkseid vanished. Dear Granny has tried her best to bring order to our world.
You mean you've been trying to take over?
But there are others who seek to thwart Granny's good intentions.
Vermin Wunderbar.
That awful, awful man. Do you know that he's actually imprisoned Darkseid's son, poor dim-witted Kalibak, in hopes of legitimizing his claim to the throne? Why, he's probably brainwashing the poor creature right now, bending him to his will.
Like you're not planning the same thing.
What do you want?
No, it's nothing, really. Granny just needs you to break into the place where Kalibak is being held and then bring him to Granny's orphanage, where he can get proper care.
If we do that, we'll be handing you control of Apocalypse.
Exactly.
And that's where we get things started here, as she very clearly lays out what has been happening on Apocalypse. We get a little bit of exposition happening as we learn, of course, that there's a battle between her and Vermin Wunderbar for the throne of Apocalypse. And in this power struggle, one of the pawns being used is another familiar face, that being Kalibak. So Wunderbar has Kalibak captured and is attempting to brainwash him, and then to an attempt to use that as a way to legitimately claim the throne of Darkseid. And Granny wants Kalibak for her own personal use so that she can brainwash him and put him on her side. And she's enlisting. The reason why she's gone after Oberon and gone through these lengths is she's looking to enlist Scott to rescue Kalibak from the X-Pit, which is Apocalypse prison that Scott is famously the only person to have previously escaped out of. And that's where we kind of get things going here as Granny departs afterwards, and Scott and Barda are sort of left holding the bag here to decide what they're going to do. And that's kind of where we get them pick up in the Watchtower after our opening credits.
That's right. We then go to the Watchtower. As mentioned, we see the Flash and elongated man sort of discussing their plight, as feeling neither of them feel that they are taken seriously enough by the rest of the Justice League. And of course, the joke being that they are quite immature as they're playing what appears to be a takeoff on Rock'em Sock'em Robots, and arguing about that game. But yeah, we see Flash notice that Mr. Miracle and Bard have arrived, and we kind of overhear the tail end of their conversation with Jean as they're explaining to Jean what the situation is, and Jean is very clear that makes no sense for the Justice League to intervene in this case, because if either Granny or Vermin Wunderbar is able to take hold of Apocalypse and unite the planet again under their reign, then they could have another dark side on their hands, another intergalactic despot ready to conquer the Earth yet again. So Jean decides that the Justice League is officially taking a neutral stance in this conflict, despite the fact that without their actions, Oberon will likely be killed by Granny Goodness. So at that moment, Flash is very taken aback by Jean's decisions, and he and Jean kind of have a discussion, a little bit of an argument over it, at which point Flash takes off and decides that he's going to offer up his services to Barda and Mr. Miracle, even though Jean has instructed him not to get involved.
We don't need these cowards. We can do it on our own.
Great news, Bertha. You don't have to.
Barda.
Isn't that what I said?
And we don't require your assistance.
We appreciate the offer, Flash, but...
Unless you've got an S on your chest, you're useless.
Hey, I may not be as strong as Superman, but I'm just as fast. Maybe faster.
Friend, maybe we can use you.
And after a little bit of a prickly introduction for Barda and Mr. Miracle and the Flash, they finally are able to sort of make peace, and they decide that the three of them are going to head to Apocalypse to try to free Kalibak and save Oberon. And then from there, we pretty much spend the rest of the episode on Apocalypse as we arrive there, and we're immediately greeted by some various. We get a lot of like deeper cut fourth world Apocalypse minions. We get the Hellhounds here attacking. We get some of the wacky Kirby robots and stuff like that later on in the episode as well. But yes, they're sort of immediately sprung into action, and they're sort of making their way through the city. And right as they make it to these ominous X pits, and they open the door, Mr. Miracle's sort of taken aback because since he was last there when he escaped, everything has sort of changed design wise. They did some remodeling, and so Mr. Miracle is now not so sure what to do. He offers to go in by himself to try to free Kalibak and to leave Barda and Flash outside, but Barda and Flash make it clear that they are not interested in sitting on the sidelines for this one, and so they go off in search of Kalibak, and Barda and Mr. Miracle take down some robots, while the Flash goes in search of Kalibak himself and is able to find him. And so we have this group of four unlikely allies, perhaps all united. And now that's really only the first half of our episode. The second half of our episode is, of course, the four now must escape this incredibly dangerous prison. At the same time, we have these we're also getting at the same time, we're getting a couple of little brief flashbacks to Scott Free as a child when he was looking to escape the X-Bits and just constantly being taunted by Granny at the same time. So you have Mr. Miracle kind of facing his fears and at the same time all four trying to stay alive as we head towards the final act of the episode.
That's right. So as you mentioned, that is the culmination of the episode is Scott Free and Big Barda and the Flash and Calabac, all willing allies at this point, attempting to escape. And the flashbacks are kind of the real highlights here, as we truly see some of the backstory, and we kind of fill in the blanks about just what made Mr. Miracle as he learned how to escape and the many times he did try to escape and fail, and how the tortures that Granny did to him kept him going, and continues even to this day to be a motivation to him. So as they escape, and he actually escapes a couple of death traps that Wunderbar has set up. The prison eventually it's set up to explode. Wunderbar decides that even though they escaped his death traps, that he's just going to blow it all up.
There's only one way to stop them now. Blow up the entire complex!
10, 9, 8, 7.
Not liking the sound of that.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Oh, Scott, you didn't let Granny down. When I heard the X-Bit had been destroyed, I thought for certain you and dear Calabac were lost. How did you manage to get out?
Ask him. Trade secret.
So he does set it up to explode. But it turns out that Mr. Miracle, Barda, Flash, and Calabac were able to successfully emerge from a boom tube. They were able to boom out before the explosion occurred. Granny is seemingly very excited and happy and congratulates Scott on his success, but tells him that even though they were able to escape with Calabac in tow, she's still planning on teaching a lesson to Oberon since they were also very rude to her. At which point, Calabac turns out to not be Calabac at this point. We have the Flash asking her where he's keeping her, and she said you'll never find out. The Flash turns to Calabac, who morphs into Jean at this point and chides her not to try not thinking about where she has Oberon. They find out that she's holding him in Darkseid's old throne room, and they're able to save him just in the nick of the time before the death trap slices him into several pieces. So it's at this point that we get at least everybody saved, and Oberon is reunited with Scott and Barda. Barda makes it very clear at this point that she wants to take out Granny and to destroy her, but she is reminded by Jean that unfortunately that the fighting there must continue, and that they can't be involved into who ultimately gets the upper hand there. So they begin walking away, the Flash and Mr. Miracle, and just before booming off of Apocalypse, Big Barda does turn back around and happen to plant a rather large fist on Granny's chin, sucker punching her right before leaving, just as a thank you for helping out not only her but and Mr. Miracle, but Oberon. And that leads us to Granny sort of wondering what went wrong with how she raised Scott, and how she failed, how he was the only one that failed, that she's failed since attempting to raise some children. So gotta love that. So they leave on the boom tube, and we're back at the watchtower for the final scene as Flash and Jean are sort of in this conversation, and before Jean can even begin speaking, the Flash cuts him off and lets him know that he's going to defend his actions, that they ultimately were the right things, and that he may have disobeyed Jean, but everything worked out. And, it actually worked out for the better because they were able to get Calabac off of Apocalypse in time, and now he's in prison on Earth. So they're keeping him safely there, away from anyone on Apocalypse to use as a pawn. And Jean stops him at that point and says that he wasn't going to lecture him. He just wanted to challenge him to a friendly game of brawling bots, which catches the Flash off guard for a second. But then he hurriedly runs to get the Brawling Bots game before claiming that he's going to be the green one, which we learned early in the episode may have longer arms than the other blue robots, as the elongated man protested. So Jean chuckles and says that he wanted to be the green one, and then we kind of get a fade to credits at that point.
Flash? Yeah, I know. I went behind your back. But look how everything turned out. We boomed back here for you, the switch went off perfectly, and now we've got Calabac locked up on Earth where neither side can use him. You don't? So yeah, I did go behind your back, but you know what? I'd do it again. What do you say to that, big guy?
I was only going to ask if you wanted to play Brawlin' Bots.
Dibs on the green one.
I wanted the green one.
So, Liam, this one is it's a 22-minute episode, which is it's a nice break from the past couple of weeks that we've had. These double features and two-parters. So It did feel like an accelerated version, pun intended, I guess, since we're here in Flash month. But it felt like an accelerated episode. It felt like a lot jam-packed into 22 minutes. It felt, I don't know. I don't necessarily know that helped it, because it felt like maybe this was something that they had planned for season one at one point, or perhaps had thought about having as a two-parter. But you get a lot of the Mr. Miracle backstory, which is fine, but it really doesn't go anywhere else for the rest of the series. We don't get a huge follow-up episode or anything like that. So we get the background of DCAU Mr. Miracle, but it didn't feel like that whole thing paid off too much, because yes, he escapes and uses it as motivation, but it wasn't as if he was struggling at the beginning of the episode. You just kind of learn about who he is, and how he was born, raised and went through the trials with Granny Goodness as a child. So it's a fine episode, I feel like, but it did feel like a lot of time was spent on giving you that backstory, only for the payoff not to feel necessarily 100% related to me. I don't know if you felt the same way or if you had other observations, but what did you think?
Yeah, well, it's funny because the interesting, the episode itself, a lot of the runtime is devoted to Barda and Flash and Calabac fighting robots. So the big plot things are, one, it's Flash going against what Jean suggests that the League should do. He's theoretically, could be setting off like an intergalactic incident here by getting involved. But because we sort of choose to focus more in the middle of the episode on Mr. Miracle and Barda, which I think they're enjoyable characters, and we'll certainly talk about that more in voice acting a little bit, then they have a good dynamic together. The little bit we see of them interacting with Oberon is fun, and like you do care if they're successful or not, if they're able to save Oberon in time and all of that. But at the same time, yeah, it felt like the episode's kind of bookended with this Flash and Martian Manhunter butting heads over whether or not to intervene and all of that. And what exactly is the mission statement of the Justice League? Are they all about, if they're all about helping people, why are they not getting involved here when an innocent person is at stake and all of that? Like it's an interesting concept, but it's kind of just these two little bookend scenes at the beginning and the end of the episode, and in the middle it's fighting robots and the Mr. Miracle flashbacks. So I don't know, maybe you could have have like a secondary objective, because they make mention that like the boom tubes don't work inside the X pits because of some technology that the Vermin Thunderbar has.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you could have done like, okay, we free Calabac, now we have to make it to this control room and turn off the boom tube thing or whatever, and then it's like a race to see if they can get to to this one room before the death traps get them or whatever. It just felt like there wasn't enough. It feels like if it was going to be the Mr. Miracle episode, it should have just almost wholly focused on him, and Flash should have taken more of a backseat. Or if it was going to be about Flash and him sort of striking out on his own and making decisions for himself and sort of being proven right in the end, that, anytime you could help somebody and you choose not to, that's the wrong decision. And so he makes the right decision by going with Barda and Mr. Miracle to save the day, even though it looks like it could end up being a really hairy situation. Like, all of those little individual pieces could be an interesting episode,
mm-hmm.
but when you just kind of mush them together, I feel like it doesn't quite add up to a completely satisfying 22 minutes, which, again, to your point, Cal, it could be that maybe if we had 2 parts to this episode,
mm-hmm.
then you would have more time, because the Mr. Miracle stuff could kind of be your B plot and the Flash plot is your A plot, or vice versa. And then you have more time. Maybe you can even work in a little bit of like, Mr. Miracle. We see the last flashback we see is Scott just escaping the X pit. We don't really see anything after that. Like, if you had more time, maybe you could show him then meeting Oberon and meeting Barda and convincing Barda to break free of Granny's control. We kind of get some exposition about that Barda was once part of the Furies and all of that, which, again, if you're a big comic book fan, you might know that story, but as in this show, you just kind of get it for a couple seconds here. So yeah, I think there's a bunch of interesting little ideas in here, but it doesn't quite all come together for my taste. So I ended up kind of on a middle of the road, or slightly better than middle of the road. I gave it a 6 out of 10 for my plot score.
Yeah, I actually had the same exact score for that, and for those reasons, it feels like there's parts of a great episode here, parts of something very interesting, but I think mishmashing them together. And you mentioned at the top we had 2 different writers, so I don't know which parts were handled by which writer, if there was a basis for this. I didn't see anything that said that there was an original comic that any of this, other than the source material, but there was nothing that was necessarily, this wasn't based on a particular issue of a comic. So I don't know how much of that is 2 writers coming together to marry an idea together, or 2 ideas together, but it did feel, like you said, just a little bit not disjointed. That's not quite the right word. It's just kind of a mashup that didn't quite lead to a very satisfying 22 minutes. There's stuff that felt like it was left undone, or kind of leaves you scratching your head as to why the focus was so much on the Scott-free stuff at the beginning, and why maybe some of the repercussions, as you mentioned, of the Flash's choices weren't necessarily played out later on. As you mentioned at the top, also, this is the first speaking role that we get for the Flash in many episodes, or the 13-14 episodes in that first season of Justice League Unlimited. So this is the 15th episode or 14th episode we've had of this show at this point, and it's the first Flash one, and we don't really get an explanation why he wasn't around much in the first season, or why he wasn't the main focus, which is okay. You didn't have to have an on-screen version of that, but to then just drop this in the middle of it and kind of make this the opening go for him does feel a little bit strange. So yeah, I think that's reflected in both of our scores. It's not a bad episode. There's a lot of fun in the sort of breaking into the Death Star type storyline that we have here with them, and I think maybe some more exploration, either a focus on the X Pit itself and some of the ins and outs of it could have made for maybe just a little bit more entertainment, or focusing on some of the psychological aspects or deeper into the psychological aspects of some of the characters that were dealing with sort of the PTSD beyond just these flashbacks, could have added, to a deeper story for everybody. So definitely reflected in our scores. All right, Liam. Well, that will bring us to our next category, which is going to be visuals and animation. As you mentioned at the top, DR Movie Co. responsible for the animation. Dan Reba was our director for this week. What did you have as far as animation and visuals? We did talk at the top about some of those deeper cuts, those deeper Kirby cuts on some of those characters and character designs. But what else stood out for you as far as visuals for this week's episode?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I really enjoyed the we talked about this with a lot of the Kirby characters, but because Bruce Timm and the rest of the people that worked on these shows were so inspired by Jack Kirby, it's these Kirby designs always translate so well into this universe.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, obviously this is not, well, timeline wise, this would be our first full look at Big Barda, although obviously in the real world timeline, she had previously already appeared in an episode of Batman Beyond. But it's kind of fun to get her in the fold. I've always just loved that Barda design, the blue suit with the gold like headpiece and all that I think is great. And it's the suit up sequence when she's going into battle is kind of fun. So I really loved the designs, the way it's not really cape movement, but there's a couple of Mr. Miracle just has this giant cape. He has like the Doctor Strange cape, I guess. He's like the big giant collar and the green and with the green. It's not really a color scheme that should even work, but somehow it does with the green cape and the red and yellow suit. So I thought the translation of these new Kirby characters, at least new to the DCAU on screen, at least, I think was a lot of fun to see. So that was a lot of fun. Some of the way you get the classic Mr. Miracle floating disc things that he flies on. Barda has her cosmic staff and all of that. So yeah, you have a lot of that, what you would expect, the Kirby accoutrements that come with that, the backgrounds and designs, where we see probably more of Apocalypse than we've ever seen before, because we've really only seen, to this point, we've seen the Darkseid's palace and the big statue and some fire pits, but it was kind of fun seeing the actual like architecture of that world laid out a little bit more. And I thought the backgrounds in the prison were really fun. There's a couple of really neat silhouette shots done. It'll be I think once all four are together, either them running or even them just sort of standing there discussing something, and then it'll just be all four of them in silhouette against this sort of red intricate background there with the really wacky Kirby designs on it. So I think there's a lot of fun like aesthetic stuff in this which is usually the case when they're adapting the Kirby stuff to the DCAU.
Absolutely, yeah. We get as you mentioned, having both Oberon and Vermin Wunderbar introduced here as well. We get some additional of those sort of outlier Kirby characters introduced also that stay pretty true to their original designs. The Scott Free design, especially with the way that they colored his eyes, the stark blue color that you can see the irises. It looks like, you mentioned at the top, these characters fit seamlessly into this DCAU, but that Mr. Miracle character design for this episode is equal parts Bruce Timm and Jack Kirby. Like either one of those artists could have drawn that, and it looks like that character model come to life. So remaining faithful to the way that these characters originally looked and incorporating so many of the Jack Kirby designs and the crackle, as you mentioned, and the different sci-fi designs on the different costumes, the circles with the lines connecting things everywhere. And I loved the flashbacks, the way that they chose to do the flashbacks. We've seen that handled differently. There's always a different a coloration to the scene to indicate, a flashback. A lot of times we see sepia tones. A lot of times we see, a gray tone or like I said, a sepia tone. Here we get the flashbacks completely in blue, which I thought was certainly different for the apocalyptic world that we're used to. It's usually those dark reds and those deep black colors with a darker red on top of them. But here we have these stark blue colors that, again, not only let you know that it's a flashback, but make everything else in the scene sort of stand out as, I don't know, I just got this panicked feeling from everything in those, and it adds to the tension that's created in the scene because, Scott's being tortured by Granny as a child, or he's being forced in this situation where it feels like there's no escape, and until ultimately he snaps and makes his escape from the X pit as a child. So I like that they differentiated those flashbacks, and they're different than other flashbacks that we've seen in prior DCAU episodes. But I agree with you. I think for the most part, this episode seems like it flows well. Calabac looked to be on model. Everybody else looked to be on model. It's fun seeing some of these additional characters that we hadn't seen before. And as you mentioned, some of the deeper apocalyptic cuts. Overall, I think this is a fun episode. There's some great visuals from the Flash. We do see some of his powers at work. We get him running down a flight of stairs, and we kind of get this overhead view of him running down several flights of stairs, and you just kind of see him run around these rectangular shapes as you see him descending deeper and deeper into the X pit as he tries to find Calabac. We see as they're making their escape, there's one trap they come upon. It's this wall of fire, and he does the classic tornado spin in order to sort of take hold of the fire and launch it ahead of him to break through a wall. I thought that was a neat manifestation of that power, and something that we hadn't necessarily seen as far as the fire is concerned before. So I enjoyed that. The escape at the beginning for Scott Free, they felt like they just kept adding things onto it to see how ridiculous it could be for his escape. It's not good enough that he's just chained to these tracks. He's then contained in a sarcophagus, and then there's a lid put on top of the sarcophagus, and then it's frozen, and then they drop a train out of the sky on top of it. It's how ridiculous can we get here? So lots of fun little things, and to kind of wrap things up with a little smirk from Jean as he kind of gives Flash an attaboy before we roll the credits, and they make the joke about the battle bots. I thought was a fun way to end the episode also. So overall, I didn't think there was necessarily one specific thing other than the flashbacks that stood out, but I think it's fun. I ended up giving visuals and animation a 7 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, I give it the exact same score. I think there's fun. I do agree that the blue filter over the flashbacks was an interesting choice, and sort of sets it apart from the usual flashback look that we might get in an episode of one of these shows. I like all of the apocalyptic in weaponry and things like that. Mr. Miracle not only flying on those hover discs, but like using them as weapons where he like kicks them off his feet and they go and knock off the cannons on the wall. I thought was pretty neat. And then the spot where Barda and Flash and Calabac are all sort of fall through the trap door, and then we just all of a sudden see the two discs floating in the air, and Barda kind of lands on them and grabs Flash and Calabac in one swoop, and then we see Mr. Miracle kind of just lounging on the side of the wall there. It's there's some really cool fun stuff in there. So not a complete home run, but a lot of good stuff to be found here. I think, again, especially I think from a design standpoint, and clearly the background artist really went above and beyond with some of the more intricate stuff we saw this week.
Absolutely. All right, Liam, let's move on to our next category, which is going to be music. As you mentioned at the top, I believe this is credited to the Dynamic Music Partners for this week. We are, of course, returning to Justice League Unlimited, so we get a lot of electric guitar in the background here as we have advanced to that point in our DCAU timeline where electric guitar tends to be used a little bit more. And it's there's no shortage of it, it feels like, in this episode, as we sort of get our own Mr. Miracle Scott-Free theme that plays sort of beginning in that opening scene, and then as they're entering into the X Pit and then escaping the X Pit, we get a couple of instances where there's a Mr. Miracle theme played. But the rest of the episode, I feel like, has some decent background music and some things where the music was called to play some mood setting. But the Mr. Miracle theme was the one that stood out for me, at not immediately memorable, but something you could tell that was set aside as, okay, this is this character's theme here. Any notes for you on the episode as a whole?
Yeah, other than the Mr. Miracle theme, I didn't have much. We are, of course, back in JLU, so a lot of the action sequences are punctuated more with the electric guitars and rock music more so than the synthesizer and stuff. Although I think maybe that's why the Mr. Miracle theme that plays, like I said, I think my favorite version of that, it plays a few times throughout the episode, but I think that moment that we just kind of talked about where they fall through the trap door and it's kind of very dramatic, and then they sort of just see, you kind of look at, they kind of give you this close-up shot of Barda, and then you kind of notice that she notices the floating hover discs there, and then the theme kind of plays as she lands on them, and then you do the pan over to him there, and then you hear it played up more heroically in his action beats and things like that when he's and as well in the flashbacks when he's makes his dramatic escape from Granny at the end there. So yeah, other than that, I don't have a ton of notes, but I do as we often talk about, it's always great when there's a unique character theme, especially for a character in this case that doesn't really have another appearance in this series. At least Mr. Miracle doesn't. So it's fun that they worked in a little bit of memorable kind of original music for him there. So I ended up settling on a 6 out of 10 for my music score.
And we are 3 for 3 thus far. So yes, I also gave it a 6 out of 10. Not as easily or hummable or memorable as last week's theme was, but certainly some standout points here, Liam, especially for an episode, as you mentioned, with a character that gets a theme that is one and done, as they say. So all right, Liam, let's move on to our final category for this week, which is going to be voice acting. Lots of, not a huge cast, but lots of memorable voices and a lot that we're familiar with from prior appearances in the DCAU, and a couple of other notable names here. Let's talk about this week's voice cast.
That's right. So first we have Art Johnson, or maybe Artie Johnson, as Vermin Wunderbar. He's doing a very stereotypical evil German voice, which and in fact Mr. Johnson actually played apparently on a show called Laugh-In, which is way before our time, and unlike things like the Adam West Batman show or Green Hornet or things like that one didn't get played in reruns. So no idea what that was about, but apparently
it was a cultural. I do know that it was it was one of those things. It was like a cultural iconic show. I think it was SNL before SNL, like a lot less political, sort of like a variety show. I only know that I think before he was president, Richard Nixon had appeared on that show at some point, famously. And there's a lot of stuff that sort of has seeped into the pop culture, or that for a period of time had seeped into pop culture that was rooted in the Laugh-In thing. So it was big for our grandparents and our parents likely would probably be familiar with some of the stuff. But yes, it probably has not been relevant for the 30 years or so.
Yeah, but that would be the reason to cast him. And I just love, and we'll get to this in a minute with Oberon, that Apocalypse has like regional dialects that apparently are pretty similar to Earth's regional dialects, because he's he's just a stereotypical German. And if we didn't really talk about his character design, he's just this like short oafish man in like a red and white general's outfit with like a star on his chest and a little monocle, and he's just he doesn't have a mustache, but if he did, he'd be twirling it. He's just this complete like silly like Saturday morning cartoon villain here, and for that role he does a great job at it.
That's right. Yeah, I think they even snuck in some of his more, or a similar line. I was reading to one of his more famous laugh-in lines. Also, of course, it's not lost that one of the villains of the Apocalyptian planet has German roots, which of course would be very, very familiar to Jack Kirby and a lot of the comic creators at that time. Making Nazi German-esque caricatures, the evil bad guys was some of their ways of striking out against evil. So yeah, I think it fits perfectly there and makes sense and was a good casting. Even if it's kind of lost on us, the casting that likely to Bruce Timm, Paul Dini, Dan Riva, the guys who grew up in this era of knowing what a cultural impact that Laugh-In was, to have this character who was famous for playing like this German caricature on that show come back and play a German caricature is just another example of one of those kind of, if you know things.
Yeah, absolutely. And he does a great job for what's asked of him. Elsewhere in the cast, we have we have the returning Jeremy Piven. Yes, that Jeremy Piven as Elongated Man. He just gets the one scene this week, but again, it's such a random thing because this is like, okay, this air. I forget what you said the air date was. This is 05?
Yes, 2005.
Okay, so it's like this is like Entourage is on the air by this point, right?
Yeah, it has to be, right? Even early on.
Right. So it's just like this is like you're not getting like pre-fame Jeremy Piven. You're getting like on a very popular HBO show, Jeremy Piven. And he's just in it for a scene and has a really funny interaction with Michael Rosenbaum as the Flash, and then he's out. But it's always kind of wacky to see an actor. And again, we're Andre Romano not above calling in a name actor to play kind of a bit part here and there across these various shows, as we well know.
Could it hurt them to show me just a little respect?
Tell me about it. I've been at this longer than you have. They still treat me like comic relief.
Better than being treated like a teenage sidekick. I mean, I was one of the original 7. Tell me the truth, Ralph. Do I seem immature to you?
Not in the least.
I bopped your block off.
That's not fair. The green guy's arms are longer.
Are not. Hey, isn't that Mr. Miracle and what's her name? Big Bertha?
I didn't even know they were in the league. But there's so many of us now, it's hard to...
No, they're not in the league. I'm sure of it.
Funny to hear him there as well. Elsewhere in the cast, we do have Dick Miller as Oberon, someone one of those character actors, done a lot of voice acting, had sort of small roles in things like the Terminator and Gremlins, but playing Oberon again, as I talked about regional accents, he's just he's just like an old New Yorker, like he's just
a kid from Brooklyn. That's right.
Yeah, and he's just and I wonder if the idea there was even though obviously famously Dan Turpin, the character design was based on Kirby. Yeah, I wonder if there's a little bit of that of the tough guy from Brooklyn with the little rough around the edges but has a heart of gold. Like I think there's a little bit of Kirby tribute in there as well, and a really fun job. Like he's not a big part of the episode, but his interactions with Granny, who we'll certainly get to in a moment here, and then with Barda and Mr. Miracle are a lot of fun.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think the casting for this one was great. I think that that we sing her praises on a weekly basis, but it's hard to remember misses. She's definitely batted close to 1,000, maybe not 1,000, but close to 750 likely. But Andrea Romano rarely misses with these, and even with these characters that only appear once. Even though you may not remember them as much because they don't have as many appearances, I feel like it's almost harder because you want to make sure that whoever it is that get cast in these one and done positions are good enough to remember that, hey, those performances are iconic. They're really, really good because you only get one shot. So if you were to miss and cast somebody maybe in the wrong role, then it would be memorable for the wrong reason. So yeah, I think that he does a great job, and the interactions that we get with those three characters, especially when they're reunited at the end, is very sweet and warm and feels very natural.
Absolutely. And also on our cast, we do have the returning Michael Dorn as Calabac, and it's great to have him back. I do think Calabac is not he's too competent in this episode for my taste.
Yeah, he does. I wanted him to fall for the cake.
Yes.
If this should be the dummy Calabac that is always screwing things up, that hasn't learned anything, and if Darkseid was still alive, would still get Darkseid's ire up at him at just how idiotic and disappointing he is as a child.
Yes, but that's obviously that's not Mr. Dorn's fault. But yeah, it's nice to have Calabac back in it. But I always think that the strength of that character in this universe is definitely his more comedic chops, as it were there. So he does get a little bit though to play off with a couple of our main voice actors here that we'll get to in a moment. But last, as far as our villainous guest stars, we of course have the late great Ed Asner as Granny Goodness here, who we've sung the praises on for years. We tried desperately to get him cast as Granny Goodness in the ill-fated live action New Gods movie before his passing. But yes, just wonderful. It's like putting on a nice warm sweater when you hear Ed Asner's Granny Goodness waltz back into our lives this week.
Exactly. But if you find that prospect distasteful, wait till you see what Oberon looks like when I send him back to you, piece by piece.
Where is Calabac?
On Apocalypse, of course. In the X-Pit. Why, you're not afraid of the pit, are you, Scott?
No, I'm not afraid.
God rest his soul. Man, what a tremendous performance and great legacy for a man that had many legendary performances across his time, his many years in Hollywood. But boy, this performance will forever be my favorite performance of his, and not this episode necessarily, but noticing just how he relished in being able to deliver the lines. And every time he refers to himself, which is anytime he talks about himself in the third person, I never understood. I never noticed, I feel like, before this episode, it's like, wait a minute, Granny always refers to herself in the third person as Granny. Why have I never known? Like, I know the lines, but like I never noticed that was a character thing. She refers to herself as Granny. But yeah, just another knockdown, drag out performance, whether it's at the beginning and taunting Scott and Barda about capturing Oberon, or at the end where she's stroking her chin and trying to, where did it all go wrong with raising Scott right before she gets smashed in the chin by Barda. But we've talked about it each and every time that he's on the show, and man, what a fun revisitation for this character as we hear Ed Asner bring it home once again as Granny here with another shining performance.
Absolutely, it was just a joy to have Mr. Asner back in that role this week, and playing off our two main heroic guest stars of the episode. We have first Farrah Fork returning, actually, as previously mentioned. She, of course, played Big Barda on Batman Beyond in the memorable episodes The Call, which we have not gotten to yet in our Batman Beyond reviews, but it's fast approaching, believe it or not. We don't got that much Beyond left as far as original episode reviews left, and that season 3 episodes looming large. But having her back here as Barda, who again folks would probably otherwise know from her role on the show Wings, where she worked with Tim Daly. So there you go.
6 degrees of DCAU separation.
Absolutely. And sadly, she's also passed away of cancer, actually, back in the early 2010s, I believe. But yeah, so I think she's just fantastic as Barda. Like, you have that, she has that very dry, sort of sarcastic thing about her when she's interacting with Oberon and Scott at the start of the episode, and then she's just ready to fly off the handle at the slightest inconvenience, whether that's Martian Manhunter turning down their pleas for help, or the Flash getting her name wrong, or some of the interactions she has with Michael Dorn as Calabac is actually one of, I think, my favorite bits of the episode, where Calabac tries to get under her skin, and she's just ready to launch right into a battle with him, and then Flash kind of has to step between them. I think that's a lot of fun as well. So I think she's a tremendous Barda, I thought.
Yeah, she fits the character well, and it's interesting. I was thinking as I was listening to it, she had to do something to separate her performance from Wonder Woman, because you have such a stoic, strong female voice as Susan Eisenberg provides for Wonder Woman. And granted, Miss Fork's performance technically came first, because her performance in Barda in Batman Beyond was done before Justice League ever came along. But in as far as this is concerned, being in this series and performing this character in this series, you have to do something where it doesn't just sound like a Susan Eisenberg clone. And I felt like she came across as a very strong female character without just sounding like she was doing a Susan Eisenberg impersonation. She made it her own. There was enough of a warmth in her interactions with Scott, where you could feel genuine love and care for Mr. Miracle as her husband, but the rage and the anger that came out when she was interacting with Granny, and the annoyance and the desire to beat Granny's face in, or the frustration that she had when Jean initially turns them down and tells them that the League can't help them, is palpable. It's done really well. And it's certainly a shame that we won't have the opportunity to hear her reprise this role ever again. But certainly, I think her leaving a long-lasting performance here that is easily memorable. And like I said, it comes across as exactly what this character embodies, which is a character that could kick your ass at any point, but still cares about those that are in her life, and that she clearly has close relationships with. So yeah, a very strong performance from her.
Yeah, I really love that interaction that she has with Oberon at the end there, when she's at first kind of seemingly giving him a hard time, and then they kind of have this nice moment where they share an embrace, and she and as well as Mr. Miller as Oberon there, I thought had a great little rapport there. And speaking of her allies in this episode, we have Ewan Gruffidd as Mr. Miracle, who folks would best know as Mr. Fantastic. He only plays superheroes with the first name Mr. But yes, in the 2000s, well, they happened. Like, I don't know if anyone has strong opinions about those Fantastic Four live action movies.
I don't think they're generally loved, I'll say that.
Yes, they existed. The first one made an enormous amount of money.
Yep.
And then there was a second one as well. So
that had the Silver Surfer in it.
That's right. Yeah. But yeah, him as Mr. Miracle, it is one of those things where if you know it's him, he's kind of just he's I believe a British actor, and so he's doing that voice as Mr. Miracle. He's doing his Reed Richards American accent as Mr. Miracle. So if you know it's him, it might be a little bit distracting to you if you like I did watched those movies about 15 times when you were 12 years old. But I mean, I think he does a good job as this character. We don't really get to see maybe a great range of emotion in his performance because the flashbacks are not him. It's actually another actor, a younger child actor. The young Scott Free is played by a child actor named Zach Shada, or Shada perhaps, and he's really the one that gets, he has the interactions with Ed Asner as Granny Goodness, and he's sort of the one working through this sort of existential pain that is living on Apocalypse as we see in the flashbacks. But he's mostly just there to kind of talk Barda down and kind of throw out. He does get his big quip of the episode, which is when someone asks him what now, and he confidently replies, "Now we make miracles." And it's pretty cheesy, but it is with the music swelling and everything. I still enjoyed that. So I think he does a good job. Although again, I don't think a ton was asked of him as far as like deep emotional range or anything.
Yeah, I think honestly, I felt like the moments where he was called to be a little bit cliched and like deliver some of those superhero-esque taglines were a little bit silly. I actually thought the reveal that he has escaped the water death trap as Barda and Flash and Calabac are sort of dropping seemingly to their doom before she lands on the Mr. Miracle foot pads, only to look over and see Mr. Miracle casually just leaning in this cavernous area. I thought that moment was a little bit more effective use of his voice acting than some of those more higher emotional parts. So I think it's fine. The human being as an actor isn't also, if you follow any of the drama surrounding him and his soon to be ex-wife and all of that, there's been a lot in the tabloids recently about him not being a great person. So even if you separate the actor from the actions and I think look at the performance here, it's not bad. I think that some of the downbeats, however, were the areas where his performance seemed to shine a little bit better for me than maybe some of the higher action points. So I don't hate the performance, but there wasn't anything that necessarily stood out on some of those larger scenes.
Absolutely. And then of course we have our pair of main original leaguers in the episode. Briefly, we have Carl Lumbly as Martian Manhunter, and then of course we have Michael Rosenbaum as the Flash. As mentioned, this is Michael Rosenbaum's first episode of Justice League Unlimited that he got to provide the voice of the Flash.
Was that a Smallville thing? Like there was we never really found out the reason why, right? Why?
Yeah, like I want to say there's a commentary track, maybe for the return on the DVDs, where Bruce Timm kind of makes an offhanded mention that that's one of the Flash's only appearances this season is him, showing up for 5 seconds and then getting beat up by Amazo or whatever. So I want to say like they kind of referenced it, but I don't know if they ever specifically said if it was the scheduling thing or if it was just they didn't write any stories for him in those first 13 episodes or what. But yeah, you see kind of all 6 of the other original leaguers in action quite a few times across those 13 episodes. So it is a bit strange that we didn't see Flash in there as well. So yeah, the perhaps a Smallville scheduling thing makes as much sense as anything.
Yeah, but boy, does he come back with a vengeance here as we get some great one-liners. As we said, we get humor right off the bat. I love the pan as he's sort of sitting there talking to the elongated man, to Jeremy Piven's elongated man, and he's complaining about how he's not taken seriously. And then of course, as you pan back, they're playing Rock'em Sock'em Robots, and that's the punchline of the joke. So he delivers that line in classic Michael Rosenbaum calm, deadpan, sort of jokey fashion. He gets a couple of additional one-liner attempts as he's freeing Calabac, and then as he kind of makes the helps the team make the escape from the X pit, and then as we mentioned before, the final interaction between him and Carl Lumbly's Martian Manhunter really, I think, seals the deal and kind of gives you the warm and fuzzies, and it's nice. Again, since we jump around with Justice League Unlimited, it's not like we've missed him terribly from the episodes that we've covered. But I remember at the time getting the warm and fuzzies and like, oh, finally we get some Michael Rosenbaum's flashback. So at the time, it was nice to have him back in the fold, so to speak here. So yeah, solid performance all the way around. I didn't think that there was anything, unfortunately, with the material that let him kind of stand out too much, but some great flash work there in the pieces that he was given. So for voice acting for this week, I ended up settling on a pretty strong 8 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, I went 1 point higher. I went 9 out of 10 for my voice acting score. Yeah, I think everybody, like I said, I don't think Ewan Gruffidd as Mr. Miracle turns in a great performance. Again, maybe again, because those big emotional beats of the episode are covered more in the flashbacks for him. But everyone else, I think, again, Farrah Fork as Barda, and as Ed Asner as Granny, and of course Michael Rosenbaum as the Flash. Just I thought everybody else was pretty much firing on all cylinders this week.
There we go. All right, Liam. Well, that would begin to wrap things up here. So let's total our scores up. Totaling everything up, I end up with a 27 out of 40 for this week. What about you?
Yeah, and based on the only one category where we had a difference this week, I have a final score of just 1 point higher. I have a 28 out of 40 for my score here.
All right, rewatchability here. So we consider the context, not a long play here for the Justice League Unlimited, because this is season 2. We're getting ready to ramp things up at this point in the series for the Cadmus story arc. So this has no Cadmus connections. We do get a little bit of what has happened after Darkseid has seemingly disappeared and died. So we get a little bit of follow-up what's happening on Apocalypse. So that threads for that obviously get picked up later on and have even played out all the way up through and including the recent Justice League tie-in comics. So I would say it's kind of important for that reason, because it does bridge some of that. You learn about it, the goings on there. But I guess the argument could be made here that you could kind of fill in those gaps otherwise. So maybe just a 1 thumb up on this one. I give it a 1 thumb up for rewatchability.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think there's definitely a lot of fun to be had here. It's fun to see the flashback. It's fun to see more of these Kirby characters worked into the show. And as you mentioned, they do, the Apocalypse Civil War is touched on again in future episodes, albeit briefly. So yeah, I think we can get 1 thumb up out of that.
Here we go. All right, Liam. Well, that will begin to wrap us up for this week. Thank you, everybody, for checking out this week's edition of the Flash Month here on the DCAU Review. Don't forget, support us if you can. Subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app. If that app lets you leave a review, like on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, leave us a 5-star review. If you leave a little blurb on Apple Podcasts, that helps us potentially work our way into the Discover page, which gets more people listening to the podcast. So if you think about it this week, you have a few minutes, leave a little review for us on Apple Podcasts if that's where you choose to listen to us. If you listen to us on Spotify, don't forget you can check out some exclusive questions that we have posted there. You can interact with those. A poll each week, and then the question that we ask our listeners. Additionally, you can subscribe to us on a lot of other podcast apps. So if you listen someplace else, make sure you hit that subscribe button. As we said at the top of the program, you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Head over to youtube.com/thepodtower. Like our videos each week when we post them there. That helps us if you do consume media that way. And even if you don't consume media that way, subscribing to the channel and liking our videos also helps helps us out. So if you think about it, give those videos a like in that youtube.com/thepodtower. It helps us and our friends that also put out some great DCAU content. Liam, you can also support the pod if you wish to by heading over to DCAUreview.com and clicking on our shop tab. You can pick up a piece of merch if you want to support the pod that way. There's also a link at the bottom of each episode through our Anchor site that you can donate to us directly if you so choose to. We thank you for those our listeners that do choose to support us that way. It helps us out a lot. Another free way to support us, check out DCAU Review on both Twitter and Instagram. We do some great stuff on Twitter. It gives us the opportunity, if you want to talk to us, chat us, share your thoughts about each week, Flash month, that Flash movie that may or may not ever end up coming to theaters, the state of DC Comics amidst the Discovery HBO merger. All of seems like there's some news dropping each and every day when it comes to that stuff. So we're keeping an eye on that and joining in the conversation. So feel free to head over to Twitter and at DCAU Review if you want to interact with us there. Liam, we have one final week here of Flash month. Believe it or not, the month of August is coming to an end. Boy, we have something pretty exciting. And a way, something that we've been looking forward to for quite a while now here when it comes to our review. But we're gonna go out on Flash month with a little bit of a bang, I'd say.
Absolutely, of course. If you love the Flash, you're a more recent fan of modern DC media, whether that's the comic books themselves or perhaps the live action television show. Or the Joss Whedon Justice League movie or the Zack Snyder Justice League movie, then you might be also a big fan of not only the Wally West incarnation of the Flash, but also, of course, the Silver Age Flash, that being Barry Allen. And so we thought for the last week of Flash month here, while both Cal and I are definitely more Wally fans at heart because of who was the Flash when we were growing up, for sure. But we felt it was important still with a month devoted to the fastest man alive that Barry gets his due. So next week it'll be an Elseworlds review with a very popular and memorable direct-to-DVD animated film, and that being Justice League: The Flashpoint Paradox.
There we go. Yeah, it's going to be an exciting one. A trip around the multiverse only seems fitting when it comes to the Flash. So we'll definitely be taking a long look at that one and a linchpin, certainly, of the last decade or so when it comes to comic book storylines. And as you mentioned, has seeped its way into other versions of the Flash. So we'll be talking about all of that and much more next week on that final week of Flash month here at the DCAU Review. And then we'll be talking about what we'll be doing for the month of September, which is going to be very exciting. But until then, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
We'll talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye-bye.